first. There's a lot of detail here. I won't test you afterwards. So we're so happy to welcome Jennifer Farmer. She's a fantastic person. She's a queer African-American woman resident in the UK since 1998. She's a writer for performance, participatory theatre maker and facilitator who centres underrepresented narratives and collaborates extensively with marginalised communities such as young people at risk of social exclusion, The Fall of Lucifer 2008, Truth or Dare 2012 and 2017, both for Belgrade Theatre, Women in Prison, Compact Failure, Clean Break and Arcola Theatre National Tour 2004, Refugees, Hear My Voice, Theatre Royal Stratford East, Older Adults, Urban Dreams, London Bubble 2008, Young People with Dyslexia, Turtle Key Arts, Users of the Mental Health Care System, V&A Museum, and Intergenerational Community Groups, City Final, Site-Specific 2018 Belgrade Theatre. Her other work includes Looking at the Sun, BAC Opera Season 2001, Clean for BBC Radio 3 2003, 270 Degrees, Payne's Plough, Young Vic 2004, A Million Different People, BBC Radio 4 2005, Words, Tricycle Theatre 2006, Bulletproof Soul, Birmingham Rep 2007, Stutter, Hotbed Festival 2008, These Four Streets, Birmingham Rep 2009, Eating Our Words, Camden People's Theatre 2012, Waltzing Tomatoes, Ithaca Gallery, USA 2013 and international festivals, Between Constellations, Pittsburgh Festival Opera, USA, Grimeborn Festival, Arcola Theatre 2018, and Another Garden Will Be Our City, coming soon. Oh no, that's been Toynbee Studios 2021, and we've got some really exciting stuff coming up as well, which I know Jennifer will talk about. So currently an associate lecturer at Goldsmiths and Central School of Speech and Drama, Jennifer has lectured at Kingston University, University of Greenwich and London South Bank University, and has facilitated workshops for many of UK's theatre and arts organisations such as the National Theatre, Almeida Theatre, Soho, Frantic Assembly and the Royal Court. At Central, Jennifer teaches on the ethics of working with vulnerable communities, centering underrepresented narratives and the dangers of art washing and white saviorism. So that is a very expansive career in a couple of short paragraphs. So I think what we usually like to kick off with is why theatre? So what was it that led you into theatre? Why theatre? And bearing in mind, we've also got opera, we've got participatory theatre in there as well. And also, while we're here, what led you to the UK as well?
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. So is Lucky. She only shows up for the very best. What led me to theatre? I think, like a lot of people, as a young person, I had an absolutely brilliant drama teacher at my school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we got tossed everything, and it felt like nothing was outside of our grasp of what we could tackle, of what we could explore. And with that, we were, acting, but also doing stage management. We could direct, and we were writing. And it was my first experience of writing, which everything clicked. I'd written before sort of stories and prose and that kind of thing, and it was something I was told I was good at. So you kind of lean towards that because it's also what you sort of supported in doing. But then writing for theatre just really, it made all the sense to me. I think because it's the experience of it, and you got to have been there, and it being live, and having rehearsed something for 4 weeks to then do a couple of nights performance, and then it's gone. And it was just wonderful. I was always trying to sort of recapture that, and it's one of the things that sort of stayed with me. So yeah, it's all about live performance for me. In that way, which is theatre making in the biggest sense, but also going into then opera and then the participatory work that I do. Why the UK? Well, when I graduated from NYU, I was at Tisch School of the Arts, which I absolutely loved, and I stayed in New York for 2 years after my degree. And I think that I needed a push, because after the structure of university, I couldn't quite get what it was to be a writer and a writer in theatre and all that. So I thought, okay, where do they do theatre really well, and where do they speak English? So let's go to London, which was amazing. I started out as a stage manager for the very first incarnation of Southwark Playhouse, for those of you who remember when it was in Borough, as well as a script reader for both the Gate and for Soho Theatre. And it was through the relationship with Soho Theatre where my first play was nurtured through their writers' attachment scheme, and was then subsequently put on at Theatre 503 when it was the Latchmere. And so, yeah, since then, I've worked with, lots of different groups, as the sort of biography sort of says, mainly looking at what I've started to now refer to as systematically excluded narratives, as opposed to being marginalized, underrepresented, because it's looking at what is historically, but also now actively happening, to not recognize the full scope of experiences or communities. I'm a facilitator as well. It's very much a part of my work. I absolutely love it, because I love the engagement with other writers mainly, but creative people, because I'm forever having to relearn, I think, and to be open for that, to always sort of recognize what I don't know yet, or what I thought I knew that I changed my mind. Yes, I think they kind of answered those questions there, maybe.
It did beautifully. And it's really interesting that you start off with that inspirational teacher at school and the importance of arts in the curriculum. That's something that is really important to me, and just shows how important that the early experiences are in shaping your work. So, I mean, there are several paths you could have gone down. You could have gone down the sort of, writing the big State of the Nation play, or sort of writing the sort of the small, intimate, between people, kind of dinner party plays. But you've chosen to sort of really look outwards and work with lots and lots of different groups. So why was that important, and what is it that the power of that theatre works so well with?
I'm fascinated by people. I'm a people watcher. I'm a people listener. I think that I'm really interested in stories, people's stories. I say everyday stories, but that doesn't mean that those stories still aren't spectacular and extraordinary. I don't think that they have to be elevated by establishments or society in order for them to be valuable. I love working with and for people in helping to facilitate stories. For me, that's just, there's something, I guess, I don't know if it goes back to the teacher that I really had a wonderful time with, Miss Stella Duffy, or if it's also just an authenticity that I really want to bring to theatre making. The work is very much tied with the creative, is tied with the politics, is tied with the activism. So I know that, it is very much about challenging and trying to actively dismantle hierarchies that, I should never exist, or status quos that should never exist. And so for me, it's one way of me trying to be able to do that through the theatre making that I do.
Which kind of brings us on to your, the part in your biography about art washing. And I have to admit, I think I understand what it means, but I've never actually heard the phrase art washing before. So what is it, you know, in your description, and why is it important in your work?
It is one of those tools of capitalism, that really sort of happens as a way of really displacing communities through the idea of the virtue of art. And so, you know, a really classic example is, I remember at Elephant Castle, when the estates were being torn down for the developers, they got in some artists who were purportedly doing some work with the communities, telling the community stories, but actually that wasn't the case. And so for me, it's very much about how art can unfortunately be used as a tool, yes, to sort of further a capitalistic agenda. You know, and I'm not immune to it. I think before my politics and understanding were as clear as they are now, I did partake in I remember a particular project that was, you know, BP sponsored, that was about road safety and young people. And then, you know, recognizing that I loved the work in the school that I did, but also recognizing the big impact, and it wouldn't be a choice that I would make now. But at the time, I wasn't as politically astute, I think, in terms of how art does get then used. Yes, as particularly sort of as displacement tools. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting that word tool. It's almost like you're saying a lip service, making the link between art and life, communities, but doesn't actually invest in the community.
It doesn't. It, you know, it very much can be part of when you sort of see the stampede of like gentrification and the violence that comes with that, of not building something with the community, and it's actually is actively displacing that community because it's not necessarily taking on board the grassroots work that's there, but trying to impose a certain kind of presence that makes it palatable and, you know, sexy for money makers and people coming in that way. So yeah, it's one of the things that I do try to talk about how we have to navigate that, because unfortunately a lot of art in the biggest sense can be funded in ways that don't necessarily meet our politics. So how do we navigate that? Yeah.
So what is the answer, or what are the potential answers to that? That's the ultimate question.
It is. I mean, I think there's no, I mean, well, first and foremost, there's an awareness, I would say, that it exists. I think that if you are able, I find it difficult because I think that it can be tricky to say that, well, I'll sort of subvert from the inside. Whereas I think we still have to acknowledge the active violence that comes from still sort of partaking. So I guess it's sort of really sort of knowing what a community is really benefiting, how have they been included in these conversations, in these decisions, are they at the very heart of the work, both in the planning, the making, the audience, the benefits in that way. So it's one that there's not an easy answer, I would say. I think we're always having to navigate it in a way, but I think there's some that can be quite cool. You can be just a bit more aware and know your place in that.
It's kind of recognizing where we all fit within that sort of puzzle. So tell us about your latest work, because it's not often that we get theatre and opera working together, and of course opera does have a bit of a reputation, and yet it can be something magical and something exciting as well. It's not just, you know, the lady in the horned helmet on a mountain. So yeah, tell us about your involvement in opera.
So the latest project is called Link in My Bio, and it is an exploration of the impact of the global rise of the alt-right. For me, opera is an extension of theatre making. So I don't feel like I have a different approach to the topics or the form. There is a different industry, and I think that is, some people are really ready for that conversation about how inaccessible opera is. You know, the spaces in which people gather aren't as, you know, a lot of they aren't as open or as friendly. So if you're thinking about, you know, theaters where you can go and sit in the cafe and, you know, be on your laptop or have coffee or any of those kinds of things, most UK opera houses don't necessarily have that facility. The Royal Opera House have only just, in their refurbishment, tried to address that, because then they recognized that if you want a place that feels as though it belongs to the people that then fund that through their taxes or the Arts Council or any of that nature, then you have to sort of make sure that it feels welcoming. So there is that side of it, but the people that I work with and the teams I work with, we just have a very clear understanding politically about the landscape in which we want to work. All of us coming from participatory theatre backgrounds, but also really sort of wanting to make the opera that we wish we could have seen and had access to before we got into the art form. So I think that's incredibly important. The new vibrant stories that are out there, and there's a huge amount of work that's happening to be able to do that. So I know that we're not the first ones, but for me it's incredibly important for us to be able to make the work that we wish we would have had access to.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, opera does seem to be almost that last sort of cultural bastion of, you know, there's only a certain sector of the community who go to theatre, or go to opera, or can afford to go to opera. And yet there's a whole creative world out there who'd be excited to contribute.
Absolutely. No, we through a ticket offer got tickets for a recent production that normally would have cost £245. That was something to me, because that's
wow.
Never have I sat in a seat like that in that venue. But also, yeah, it is just also very clear as to what are the barriers that are there. And you know, we got a ticket offer through an initiative. So again, it's sort of having to be in on the know in order to be able to then have access to even more of an affordable ticket. But that was still £30. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. As much theatre as I see, you know, as a lot of us see, £30 is still a lot to pay for a theatre ticket.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's tricky. It's tricky.
But hopefully, you know, it's sort of crossing those barriers is, you know, is kind of the next step for arts in general.
I'm hoping so. I mean, there's so much talk about, you know, new audiences, about, you know, cross art form work, multidisciplinary work. You know, I just battled through an Arts Council application where we're looking at, I know, I'm sure everyone's going, yeah. But, you know, the case for, you know, the creative diversity. And so learning from other forms or sectors in that way. So I mean, our opera, it's based on a route in South London, so one that I know very well, and so really so taking in the communities that are impacted by displacement, gentrification, stripping of resources, because those communities are both targeted by the alt-right, but also would be radicalized by the alt-right. And so, that is bringing in so much in terms of cross-cultural musical musicality, the language that we're using. We're just exploring so much with young people. We're using gaming technology in it. It's going to be interactive, which is a whole other thing that we're having to figure out, which is brilliant. But yeah, it's also just like, it has to be engaging, it has to be relevant, it has to be, the work that we would want to have seen ourselves at that age.
Brilliant. And it's interesting with the whole sort of alt-right kind of culture that I think this last 2 years has just seen us kind of move further and further apart in terms of sort of politics with a big P and politics with a small p. And it's interesting to hear how art could potentially be the tool by which we explore each other's viewpoints in a sort of very basic way. I watched that Louis Theroux documentary last night, which is interesting. It's fascinating. Gives you a real sort of insight into what motivates people, which is always really happening. So let me see. Yeah. So in going on to your teaching, you do quite a lot of teaching, lecturing, and workshopping. I was quite interested in this description about teaching about the ethics of working with vulnerable groups, which kind of probably fits in with that art washing and the sort of multi-community art creation as well. Tell me about that.
I think that there's I think integrity is my big word about the arts, integrity and ethics. Some of the work that I do with participatory theatre makers of the future, it really is to interrogate why you want to do this work, who is the work for, because with doesn't always mean for. I've seen, quite a few high-profile pieces where it may have been developed with a community, but that community is actually not representative of who it's being presented to in sort of established theatre spaces. Are we being extractive? Are we taking stories for a gaze that is probably going to cause further harm? Is it about a titillation or about voyeurism? Whereas actually, if it's about what for me the art is about, is communication, conversations, then it has to then be as equal of the equity has to be there. So it's really sort of then thinking about, it always has to be an exchange for me. Yeah. From the first participatory project that I did, it was always about, well, what am I giving if I'm receiving? And it has to be as valuable. It has to be what people want and or need. So for me, it's very much, also asking, they set the terms in a way, because I have a skill, I have training. That doesn't mean that other people don't have skills or training that may not be recognized by formal institutions or the ways in which we recognize skills or craft in that way. I think sometimes people, if it's about facilitating people to be able to tell their own stories in their own way, if it's about sharing a platform or resources, sometimes it's really difficult, because I think you can be drawn to telling a story, but it's also, that may not be my story to tell. And I think that, to be really, really honest about that, I think, ego can come into it, as well as a sense of entitlement across the board sometimes. And I think, particularly when you then have a lack of equity amongst the work, if the work isn't accessible, or the spaces aren't accessible, the resources aren't accessible, who then gets to tell stories? So for me, it's incredibly important that I'm never causing further harm. I'm never doing trauma tourism. That's incredibly important to me. I mean, I'm very much about the whole scope of humanity. And I think when we're talking about groups that have been made vulnerable, quite often what is seen as their only currency or value is the trauma, which I find incredibly difficult, frustrating.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. And I think it's one of the key things is having the discussion and talking to people and being open and having an open mind, and sort of recognizing we all have a place within that. I mean, which is all sort of, very, very serious and very, very important. But I want to touch on humor as well, because you're a very funny person as well. And you use humor as an amazing tool in your work to sort of bring people with you as well. So why is humor in your writing, when you're writing about these incredibly important topics, important?
I write about humor, and well, the work is humorous, but also there's a lot of food in my work as well. But it's also because that's a huge part of who we are as people. I often have students do that exercise of the 24-hour clock, which some of you who are performers probably know. Do 24 hours in the life of your character. And that 24 hours is going to have, a huge variety of experience, of emotion, everything. It's going to show everything about them in that day. And it doesn't negate from the things that may be difficult, but there's also the joy, there's also the humor, there's also, the moments of utter silliness that I think, are crucial. I'm very much a believer in joy as a radical act, because I think that in the work that I do, it is so often scarce, but also not necessarily encouraged in a way. I remember a piece that I did in a play, a scene in a play for my play Compact Failure, that was for women in prison. There was a moment that's really quite sort of joyful and silly, where they're just talking about sort of songs and perfume and things like that, which was very representative of what we talked about in one of the workshop sessions, because we just talked about Enya and what kind of perfumes we liked, and the bra catalog Bravissimo. I mean, it was that kind of thing. Yeah. And someone said, "Oh, that's really glib," and I was like, you're wanting it to be only a painful time. And it's like, well, the characters are human. We're feeling everything all the time. So yeah, I find that it's necessary, but also I think that's how I move in the world as well. It's not the toxic positivity of, good vibes only, but it's how we cope, it's how we navigate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's perhaps one thing we've learned over the last couple of years in particular, and with, the world as it is, that sometimes you just have to let go and laugh and find the humour, because otherwise I think we'd just all go under, wouldn't we? So sort of on that note, I love this 24-hour clock thing. If you were to give writers, emerging writers, like your favorite, not a top tip, but your favorite input, what would that be? I'll put you on the spot now.
Oh gosh, I know. I think it's about, I really do think, the work that you want to put out into the world. What are we contributing to the world?
Yeah.
I'm very much about, the ideas of manifestations and conjuring of spaces and worlds and sort of speculative thinking made interaction. And I remember sort of reading, I did a workshop in the summer last year, that was looking at Octavia Butler's work, and very much about how, speculation is affirmation and manifestation. And so what do we want to speak into existence? And even if that's hope, even if that's joy, if those are moments of, of just really sort of authentic humanity, I think for me, it's about what world do we want to build and sort of new ways of thinking. If that answers the question, which that's my tip, but how practical that is, I don't know. So
I think it's about sort of bearing that in mind, isn't it? Rather than the sort of, always write for 40 minutes every day and do free write. I think sometimes it's just having that mindset ready to, before you go off and create something. So I think that works beautifully. So I think just checking my clock, the time has come to see if I'm going to remove your pin now. I hope it doesn't hurt. To see if anyone has any questions. And this is always a time of night where it goes really, really quiet. And everyone goes, no, not me. I don't have a question. But I think if there's something interesting you've heard there, then either just pop it in the chat box, or I think simply because we're a small group, maybe unmute or put your camera on or raise your hand, whatever you'd like to do. Here comes Tilly.
I have one off the bat. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. What I really clicked with was when you were talking about integrity and ethics, and it kind of really I've done like a lot of thinking these past couple of years about values and about all of that kind of stuff. And we get pressured as writers so often to kind of have a unique selling point, or like like, who are you as a writer, and like, oh, you only write like feminist queer things, or you only do this. And it's just like, your career is testament to the fact that like you can make an extraordinary breadth of work, but there's like a clear clarity to like the reasons why you're making it. So basically I just wanted to sort of comment on that, and then kind of wonder, like, is this kind of connected to your sort of values as a person? Is that sort of, do you find that drives you more than kind of the artistic kind of wanting to be a particular type of artist, essentially, is kind of what I was rambling on.
Yeah, I don't it was funny because you sort of mentioned the radio play A Million Different People, because it comes from the Verve song A Million Different People, and I always loved that song because it was I'm a multitude of folks from one moment to the next, and I'm still trying to work it out sometimes myself, and sort of what I'm interested in and what surprises me has changed and has shifted or clarified. I used to think that it was me being reactive to someone wanting to put me into a particular box as a certain kind of writer, but I realized actually I don't care, because I think it's sort of, as you say, it's the values that then are quite then clear for me. I talk to students a lot about what is unique about your voice or vision as a writer, as an artist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you write in, you know, dialogue in a certain way, or it's the subject matter. It might be your process, the way you work, the work you want to put out into the world, how you engage with people. So it's sort of like, I think there's so many things that I'm interested in, that I kind of want to try it all, but I also want to sort of try it in a way that is authentic and is heartfelt. I think one thing about my work is there's sincerity with everything I do, because I would find it really difficult to do work that isn't sincere, for myself personally, and sort of my values, but also I think just on the practical, when I've done something that it hasn't been sincere, I get it doesn't go well. And so I either lose interest or it fizzles out, because I know that the passion that needs to be there for the long haul needs to come from a place that is very true and authentic. So yeah, for me it is the sincerity of it, of not sensationalistic, not sort of titillating, whether it is something that is current. I mean, I think there's something about that, but it's not doing it because for the sake of it, which I think you can always tell when someone's doing something because it's the thing to do, or have been told it's the thing to do. It's the sexy bit now, and it's actually the approach. It always just sort of feels really, really false to me. And so, like for instance, with the opera, I'm not a gamer. The most gaming that I do is Pac-Man at the end of the pier in the arcade. That's me. But one of the composers is a big gamer. Our director's now becoming into gaming. We're working with consultants. So for me, it's about, again, an authenticity and a sincerity that comes at some point, even if it's not necessarily me, in a way. So I've written, about experiences that I haven't had. A current commission is with Utopia Theatre Company, that's looking at how medical racism has impacted particularly Black women's experience of pregnancy and childbirth, with the statistics having shifted from being 5 times more likely to die than white women to 4 times now. So there's a bit of progress. And I've never given birth. I've never been pregnant. But I've done the work in order to feel as though I am giving I'm not being extractive. There's the space for not only other people who are on the creative team just to have an input, but the research that we've done. It's very much about making sure that it is authentic and the Black women who've had experience feel heard and safe with this storytelling, that it feels true to them, and if it feels true for them and to them, again, without being further harmful, that's the best thing for me, really. That's kind of all I care about. So, pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. Just that taking care with people's experiences, which is Absolutely. So important. Yeah. So anyone else with a question? Now is your chance. Don't be shy, come forward. It's all gone quiet. Okay, well, listen, while you're thinking, I'm going to go back to my questions.
There's one in the chat.
There's a question, because I'm sure you're fed up with hearing about my voice by now.
Sarah, do you want one of us to read it out, or would you like to read it out?
Oh, sorry, for me to read.
No, sorry, I was asking Sarah if she wanted to read out her own question, or if she, as in you want us to read it out. Sorry, I managed to confuse this. I've done like the bad host job.
Do you want me to give that a read? Okay, so yeah, cool. Sarah says, What advice would you give to playwrights who are devising or writing work with characters from a different background or group to them in order to make sure that they are authentic? Great question.
Thank you for your question, Sarah. It's one that I'm battling. It's a challenge that I have a lot of times. I think research is absolutely key, and I think research comes in very different ways. Because I love to listen out. Because I'm from the South in America. And so we have a rich sort of language of colloquialisms and sort of imagery. So I'm always really excited by my regional sayings, for instance. And so the play that's about medical racism, it's primarily set in Leeds. And so I collect language, I phrase, but so whether that's reading, whether that's going to talk to people and listening, but it's always about taking it back to those backgrounds or communities to check in, to say, is this authentic? I think that's part of the writing process anyway. I love, being in a rehearsal room where you can chop it up to see what works and what doesn't. For the opera, because it's set in a world of young people. I, at 47, am no longer 15. So I've got to then, check in to go, right, is this true? Is this authentic? And they will say, yes, Jennifer. And they'll say, no, Jennifer, this is not it. Pull it in. And I'm open to that. So for me, it's recognizing what I don't know. I think that's one of the first things, is to recognize what I don't know, to then seek out people who then do know, and making sure that there is the communication conversation that's there. So for the opera, we're working with the school that I worked with before through the National. And so it's partly, the text and language that we'll be using for them, but we're also going to be developing some of the interactive sort of technology with them. Again, it's always about the exchange that's there. To me, that's absolutely crucial in that way. So I hope that's helpful, Sarah. But that's sort of what I try to do.
I think it's the taking care, isn't it? Just being thoughtful and authentic. And I know there's been a lot of conversations where people saying, well, you can't write that, or you can't be that character. But it's more about the representing that voice with authenticity and effective research as well.
Absolutely. I think centering compassion in that, again, going back to the integrity, why might you want to be telling that story? And then, recognizing, okay, well, if you don't know that experience, what can you then do to make sure that you are doing that with a sincerity, and with ethics in that way. I think that excuse that you can't do that, I think that's such a reactionary cop-out of people who actually don't want to take the care, because I think that an ego comes with it of, every story is mine, therefore I should be able to do this. And it's like that there's no story that you can't tell. It's why you're telling it. And I think, to really sort of interrogate your motives behind that. I think duty of care is incredibly important in the making, in the viewing. I mean, there have been shows that there's some theaters I wouldn't necessarily see certain work, because I don't think the theater has done the work to make it a safe space as an audience member. So there's some topics I go, you haven't done the outreach to make sure that this is an inclusive audience that can recognize what these experiences are, and that I will watch it here. And there's some that, there's places that I know, because it's definitely in their bones that they do that work. So I feel incredibly safe as an audience member to go see lots of work that may have challenging themes or under-recognized, experiences, because I know how they've done that duty of care.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting. I think there's probably a lot more we could say about that. Any more questions, right? Or does anyone want to contribute to that discussion? Mamet, welcome.
Yeah, hello. It's quite the same question as Sarah, but probably the exact opposite. What is your advice when it comes to theatres really in the UK? And my apologies to Finborough, probably included as well. When they don't accept any play from me, I'm from Iran originally, unless it has some root in my background. Well, I'm a resident of the UK. I live here, kid is growing up here, I'm a Londoner. Obviously, I'm not from London. And I like to write about people in London or in UK, you know. And theatres don't welcome that, you know. Okay, I'm Mamet from Iran. Oh, wonderful. What is your play? This is my play. But this is not about Iranians or immigrants. Perhaps I don't want to write about Iranians. And I mean, or something global, something about just two people and their relationship really in this world. They could be from anywhere really. And I really struggle with this situation. Yeah, just friendly chat, your advice.
No, it's absolutely, it is the question of who is afforded the space, the resources to tell any story, and who is expected to tell a very particular story because that's seen as their currency. And it is very difficult. I've had mix of experiences with it. When I work with certain groups, I try to acknowledge that the reason why we might be accessing each other is because of a certain experience that you're having. So whether that's young people who are at risk of social exclusion, but it's also that you are a human being, and so you can, you know, you can tell any story, and it is going to be just as valid, and it's going to be coming from your experience, whatever your experience is. Even if your experience is, let's talk about what it is to take a ride to Mars. I think that, you know, we should, as artists, as the creative community, hold our theatres accountable for that, about that challenge of, well, if I, as a queer Black woman, write about this topic, that doesn't make it any less from my experience as a queer Black woman, because I'm writing it. So it's a tricky one. I don't know. So I don't necessarily know if I have the answer. I'm with you in solidarity on that. I recognize it. I think that, you know, if we can collectively, particularly those of us who may have more either resources or platforms, be able to hold theatres accountable to go, you know, are you having a very small vision of what artists can create? Is it coming from, you know, a marketing, you know, point that is going to be detrimental to the stories? So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. I mean, I really want you to tell every story that you can.
No, yeah, it was definitely helpful. I can just add to that, well, I have one of my plays under production at the moment. It's about two Egyptian in London. Still, I had a lot of discussion why they are Egyptians and not Iranians, you know, and, you know, but still, it comes from a background to immigrants in London, really makes no difference. But the issue is, not issue really, the reality is whatever we write comes from our experience and background. Even if I write about two Londoners, still I'm looking at it from a person who's come from Iran, you know, so I have my Iranian background and experience for whatever I write, you know. So, but thank you anyway. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. You know, we are always in the fabric of our work. So it's always going to be of your experience because it's from your pen. You know what I mean? So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. For
Cheers.
that.
Thanks, Amit. Adam
bugger
has,
off.
oh no,
Stay.
Adam has posted a message in the chat. He said there's so many wonderful ideas to reflect on, and he has no question, but a wonderful moment of synchronicity. Is that how you say it? Yeah. I began reading Octavia Brood today, which is inspired by Octavia E. Butler's work and ideology. So there you go. Lots of connections and things coming together.
She also does talk about discipline being, you know, incredibly important, almost as important as inspiration, actually more important than inspiration. Because if discipline comes, you know, with discipline, then comes the inspiration. So, you know, I don't necessarily do the 40 minutes every day, but I think it is important to prioritize your creativity in writing, because I think that I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but I do think that life can get in the way, and it can be the one thing that we can make, you know, so much easier to dismiss. Whereas actually, you know, I have a separate writing studio that I go to because it's much easier for me to be able to think and work and sort of leave it there. As opposed to then getting distracted by putting on the washing, or you know what I mean. I don't even have Wi-Fi there, because it's like I don't know, I just end up looking at emails or, you know, streaming something on Netflix. so yeah, I think it's really important to be able to prioritize it in whatever way. I mean, I do the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if anyone ever does. I mean, where you work for 25 minutes and then you have a 5-minute break, which I discovered about 5 years ago through the Playwright Center in the US, and I've never looked back, because even if you've only got, you know, 2 hours, then it's just like, it feels so very much that this is what I'm dedicating and investing in right now, that I know that, you know, emails or the laundry will happen at some point, but for these 2 hours, it's me to write. And yeah, it's incredible. It's the most difficult thing, but I think it's also the most important thing as well. How do we prioritize our creativity? Which, yeah, we're all battling with.
That's such an important point, because, you know, you're right. Work, relationships, cats, everything gets in the way, doesn't it? And actually, we need to take our writing or our creativity as seriously as everything else in our lives as well. I love the idea of having that little writing shed to go to. So important. So we're kind of coming towards the end of our time. So I don't know if anyone has any more questions, or if Neil, if you want to do the usual sort of, you know, the usual parish notices at the end of the meeting.
Parish notice. Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. A lot to think about. I had a meeting recently where it was me, 2 other elderly white guys with a combined age of about 170, and me going, "We can't talk about apartheid, guys. We you know, and the blank looks on their faces. It's so important." And anyway, we battle. So parish notices are, if you're online, which you are, because you're online now, we have 2 online shows free to view, and they're coming off this week. So an Earls Court Miscellany, all about the local area, with poetry and prose and music, and How to Make a Revolution, which was filmed in the UK and in the occupied territories, with an Israeli writer-director and a Palestinian co-writer, and is excellent. And then live theatre, we hope, after Boris's announcement today, reopens next week at the theatre with a brand new play called Bacon, which won the Tony Craze Award at the Soho. Do come along and see it. That's it. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you. And Jennifer, if we want to find you on social media, Can we do that?
Oh, you can do. I'll put it into the chat, but I am at This Is Farmer, which is the name that I just came up with when you start Twitter 10 years ago.
I
And it's
know.
never changed. To me, it's like, okay, sure. So yeah, so that's me on Twitter and Instagram, though Instagram is usually photos of my allotment, which I think is just as important. Do you know what I mean? We've got to have the joy that's there. If I can also put into the chat a work in progress that we are, a composer and I are working with in April, looking at women and non-binary pioneers in STEM, the STEM field. So that's going to be in Suffolk at Snake Malting. So if anyone wants to come to the lovely sort of, countryside of Suffolk, yeah, we'll be doing that in April.
Fantastic.
That sounds
There
amazing.
There are more things we could have talked about, but time, as always, has run away with us. So I just want to say thank you so much to people for coming along. And I know we've got a couple of newbies tonight. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Jennifer for being really sort of thoughtful. And I think that's your staple, isn't it? You're always really thoughtful about your work and how you place your work in the world. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And we will let you know in due course next month's guest, next month's date, and hope to see you all then. But until then, good writing. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.